Hi there, today I'm gonna continue reading The Animal Farm from George Orwell. So I hope you are ready to relax so we can start by chapter 8. A few days later, when the terror caused by the execution had died down, some of the animals remembered, or that they remembered, that the Sixth Commandment decreed, "No animal shall kill any other animal," and thought no one cared to mention in the hearing of the pigs or the dogs. It was felt that the killings which had taken place did not square with this. Clover asked Benjamin to read her the Sixth Commandment, and when Benjamin, as usual, said that he refused to meddle in such matters, she fetched Muriel. Muriel read the commandment for her. It ran, "No animal shall kill any other animal without cause." Somehow or other, the last two words had slipped out of the animal's memory. But they saw now that the commandment had not been violated, for clearly there was good reason for killing the traitors who had leagued themselves with Snowball. Throughout that year, the animals worked even harder than they had worked in the previous year to rebuild the Windmill with walls twice as thick as before, and to finish it by the appointed date, together with the regular work of the farm, was a tremendous labor. There were times when it seemed to the animals that they worked longer hours and fed no better than they had done in John's days. On Sunday morning, Squealer, holding down a long strip of paper with his trotter, would read out to them lists of figures proving that the production of every class of foodstuff had increased by 200%, 300%, or 500%, as the case might be. The animals saw no reason to disbelieve him, especially as they could no longer remember very clearly what condition had been like before the rebellions. All the same, they were days when they felt that they would sooner have had less vigor and more food. All orders were now issued through Squealer or one of the other pigs. Napoleon himself was not seen in public as often as once in a fortnight. When he did appear, he was attended not only by his retinue of dogs but by a black cockerel who marched in front of him and acted as kind of trumpeter, letting out a loud cock-a-doodle-doo before Napoleon spoke. Even in the farmhouse, it was said, Napoleon inhabited a separate apartment from the others. He took his meal alone with two dogs to wait upon him, and always ate from the Crown Derby dinner service, which had been in the glass cupboard in the drawing room. It was also announced that the gun would be fired every year on Napoleon's birthday, as well as on the other two anniversaries. Napoleon was now never spoken of simply as Napoleon. He was always referred to in formal style as our leader, Comrade Napoleon, and the pigs liked to invent for him such titles as Father of all animals, Terror of mankind, Protector of the sheepfold, Duckling's friend, and the like. In his speeches, Squealer would talk with the tears rolling down his cheeks of Napoleon's wisdom, the goodness of his heart, and the deep love he bore to all animals everywhere, even and especially the unhappy animals who still lived in ignorance and slavery on other farms. It had become usual to give Napoleon the credit for every successful achievement and every stroke of good fortune. You would often hear one hand remark to another, under the guidance of our leader, Comrade Napoleon, I have laid 5 eggs in 6 days. Or 2 cows enjoying a drink at the pool, with example, thanks to the little sheep of Comrade Napoleon, how excellent this water tastes. The general feeling on the farm was expressed in a poem entitled Comrade Napoleon, which was composed by Minimus and which ran as follows: Friend of the fatherless, Fontaine of the happiness, Lord of the swill bucket, oh, how my soul is on fire when I gaze at thee, calm and commanding eye, like the sun in the sky, Comrade Napoleon. Thou art the giver of all that thy creatures love, full belly twice a day, clean straw to roll upon, every beast, great or small, sleeps at peace in his stall. Thou watches over all, Comrade Napoleon. Had I sucking pig, ere if he had grown as big, even as a pin bottle, or as a rolling pin, he should have learned to be faithful and true to thee. Yes, his first squire should be Comrade Napoleon. Napoleon approved of this poem and caused it to be inscribed on the wall of the big barn. At the opposite end from the 7 Commandments, it was surmounted by a portrait of Napoleon in profile, executed by Squealer in white paint. Meanwhile, through the agency of Windmill, Napoleon was engaged in complicated negotiation with Frederick and Pelican. The pile of timber was still unsold. Of the two, Frederick was the more anxious to get hold of it, but he would not offer a reasonable price. At the same time, there were renewed rumors that Frederick and his men were plotting to attack Animal Farm and to destroy the windmill, the building of which had roused the furious jealousy in him. Snowball was known to be still skulking on Pinchfield Farm. In the middle of the summer, the animals were alarmed to hear that 3 hens had come forward and confessed that, inspired by Snowball, they had entered into a plot to murder Napoleon. They were excused immediately, and fresh precautions for Napoleon's safety were taken. 4 dogs guarded his bed at night, one at each corner, and a young pig named Pinky was given the task of testing all his food before he ate it, lest it should be poisoned. At about the same time, it was given out that Napoleon had arranged to sell the peel of a timber to Mr. Pillington. He was also going to enter into a regular agreement for the exchange of certain product between Animal Farm and Foxwood. The relation between Napoleon and Pillington, though they were only conducted through whimper, were now almost friendly. The animals distrusted Pillington as a human being, but greatly preferred him to Frederick, whom they both feared and hated. As the summer wore on and the windmill neared completion, the rumors of an impending teacher's attack grew stronger and stronger. Frederick, it was said, intended to bring against them 20 men all armed with guns, and he had already bribed the magistrates and police so that if he could once get hold of the title deeds of Animal Farm, they would ask no questions. Moreover, terrible stories were leaking out from Pinchfield about the cruelties that Frederick practiced upon his animals. He had flogged an old horse to death. He starved his cows. He had killed a dog by throwing it into the furnace. He amused himself in the evenings by making cows fight with the splinters of razable tied to their spurs. The animal's blood boiled with the rage when they heard of these things being done to their comrades, and sometimes they clamored to be allowed to go out in a body and attack Pinchfield Farm, drive out the humans and set the animals free, but Squealer concealed them to avoid rash action and trust in Comrade Napoleon's strategy. Nevertheless, feeling against Frederick continued to run high. One Sunday morning, Napoleon appeared in the barn and explained that he had never at any time contemplated selling the peel of timber to Frederick. He considered it beneath his dignity, he said, to have dealings with the scoundrels of that description, the pigeons who were still sent out to spread tidings of the rebellion were forbidden to set foot anywhere on Foxwood, and were also ordered to drop their former slogan of death to humanity in favor of death to Frederick. In the late summer yet, another of Snowball's machinations was laid bare. The wheat crop was full of weeds, and it was discovered that on one of his nocturnal visits Snowball had mixed wheat seeds with the seeds corn. Gander, who had been privy to the plot, had confessed his guilt to Squealer and immediately committed suicide by swallowing deadly nightshade berries. The animals now also learned that Snowball had never, as many of them had believed he'd here, received the order of Animal Hero First Class. This was merely a legend which had been spread sometimes after the Battle of the cowshed by Snowball himself. So far from being decorated, he had been censured for showing cowardice in the battle. Once again, some of the animals heard this with a certain bewilderment. Matt Squealer was soon able to convince them that their memories had been a fault. In the autumn, by a tremendous, exhausting effort, for the harvest had to be gathered at almost the same time, the windmill was finished. The machinery had still to be installed, and Wimper was negotiating the purchase of it, but a structure was completed. In the teeth of every difficulty, in spite of experience, of primitive implements, of bad luck, and of Snowball's treachery, the work had been finished punctually to the very day. Tired out but proud, the animals walked around and round their masterpiece, which appeared even more beautiful in their eyes than when it had been built at the first time. Moreover, the walls were twice as thick as before. Nothing short of explosive would lay them low this time. And when they thought of how they had labored, with what discouragements they had overcome, and the enormous difference that would be made in their lives when the sail were turning and the dynamos running, when they thought of all this, their tiredness forsook them, and they gambled round and round the windmill, uttering cries of triumph. Napoleon himself, attended by his dogs and his cockerel, came down to inspect the completed work. He personally congratulated the animals of their achievement and announced that the meal would be named Napoleon Meal. 2 days later, the animals were called together for a special meeting in the bar. They were struck dumb with a surprise when Napoleon announced that he sold the pile of timber to Frederick. Tomorrow Frederick's wagon would arrive and begin carting it away. Throughout the whole period of his seeming friendship with Pillington, Napoleon had really been in secret agreement with Frederick. All relation with the Foxwood had been broken off. Insulting messages had been sent to Pillington. The pigeons had been told to avoid Pinchfield Farm and to alter their slogan from "Death to Frederick" to "Death to Pillington." At the same time, Napoleon assured the animals that the stories of an impending attack on Animal Farm were completely untrue, and that the tales about Frederick's cruelty to his own animals had been greatly exaggerated. All these rumors had probably originated with Snowball and his agents. It now appeared that Snowball was not, after all, hiding in Pinchfield Farm, and in fact had never been there in his life. He was living in a considerable luxury, so it was said, at Foxwood, and had in reality been a pensioner of Pillington for years past. The pigs were in ecstasies over Napoleon's cunning. By seeming to be friendly with Pillington, he had forced Frederick to raise his price by 12 pounds. But the superior quality of Napoleon's mind, said the Squealer, was shown in the fact that he trusts nobody. He said Squealer, not even Frederick. Frederick had wanted to pay for the timber with something called a check, which it seemed was a piece of paper with a promise to pay written upon it. But Napoleon was too clever for him. He had demanded payment in real £5 notes, which were to be handed over before the timber was removed. Already Frederick had paid up, and the sum he had paid was just enough to buy the machinery for the windmill. Meanwhile, the timber was being carried away at high speed. When it was all gone, another special meeting was held in the barn for the animals to inspect Frederick's banknotes. Smiling beatifically and wearing both his decoration, Napoleon reposed on a bed of straw, and on the platform, with the money at his side, neatly piled on a china dish from the farmhouse kitchen. The animals filed slowly past, and each guessed his fill, and and Boxer put on his nose to sniff at the banknotes, and the flimsy white things tried and rustled in his breath. 3 days later, there was a terrible hullabaloo. Wimper, his face deadly pale, came racing up the path on his bicycle, flung it down in the yard, and rushed straight into the farmhouse. The next moment, a choking roar of rage sounded from Napoleon's apartments. The news what had happened spread round of the farm like wildfire. And the banknotes were forgers. Frederick had got the timber for nothing. Napoleon called the animals together immediately. In a terrible voice pronounced the death sentence upon Frederick. When captured, he said Frederick should be boiled alive. At the same time, he warned them that after these treacherous deeds, the worst was to be expected. Frederick and his men might make their long-expected attack at any moment. Sentinels were placed at all of the approaches to the farm. In addition, 4 pigeons were sent to Foxwood with a conciliatory message, which it was hoped might re-establish good relation with the Billington. The very next morning, the attack came. The animals were at breakfast when the lookouts came racing in with the news that Frederick and his followers had already come through the 5-barred gate. Boldly enough, the animals sallied forth to meet them, but this time they did not have the easy victory that they had in the Battle of Cauchet. There were 15 men with a half a dozen guns between them, and they opened fire as soon as they got within 50 yards. The animals could not face the terrible explosion and the stinging pellets. And in spite of the efforts of Napoleon and Boxer to rally them, they were soon driven back. A number of them were already wounded. They took refuge in the farm buildings and peeped cautiously out from chinks and knotholes. The whole of the big pasture, including the windmill, was in the hand of the enemy. For the moment, even Napoleon seemed at a loss. He paced up and down without a word, his tail ridging at the end twitching. Wistful glances were sent in the direction of Foxwood. If Billington and his men would help them, they might yet be won. But at this moment, the four pigeons who had been sent out on the day before returned, one of them bearing a scrap of paper from Pillington. On it was penciled the words, "Serves you right." Meanwhile, Frederick and his man had halted about the windmill. The animals watched them, and a murmur of dismay went round. Two of the men had produced a crowbar and a sledgehammer. They were going to knock the windmill down. "Impossible," cried Napoleon. "We have built the walls far too thick for that. They could not to knock it down in a week." "Courage, comrades." But Benjamin was watching the movements of the man intently. The two with the hammer and the crowbar were drilling a hole near the base of the windmill. Slowly and with an air almost amusement, Benjamin nodded his long muzzle. "I thought so," he said. "Do you not see what they are doing? In another moment they are going to pack blasting powder in that hole." Terrified, the animals waited. It was impossible not now to venture off the shelter of the buildings. After a few minutes, the men were seen to be running in all directions. Then there was a deafening roar. The pigeons swirled into the air, and all the animals, except Napoleon, flung themselves flat on their bellies and hid their face. When they got up again, a huge cloud of black smoke was hanging where the windmill had been. Slowly a breeze drifted it away. The windmill had ceased to exist. This side, the animals' courage returned to them. The fear and despair they had felt a moment earlier were drowned in their rage against this vile, contemptible act. A mighty cry for vengeance went up, and without waiting for further orders, they charged forth in a body and made trade of the enemy. This time they did not heed the cruel pellets that swept over them like hail. It was a savage, bitter battle. The men fired again and again, and when the animals got to close quarters, lashed out with their sticks and their heavy boots. A cow, 3 sheep, and 2 geese were killed, and nearly everyone was wounded. Even Napoleon, who was directing operation from the rear, had the tip of his tail chipped by a pellet, but the man did not go unscathed either. 3 of them had their heads broken by blows from a boxer hoof. Another was gored in the belly by a cow's horn. Another had his trousers nearly torn off by Jessian Blumble. And when the 9 dogs of Napoleon's own bodyguard, whom he had instructed to make a detour under cover of the hedge, suddenly appeared on the man's flank, baying fiercely, panic overtook them. They saw that they were in danger of being surrounded. Frederick shouted to his men to get out while the going was good, and the next moment the cowardly enemy was running for a dear life. The animals chased them right down to the bottom of the field, and got in some last kicks thus at them as they forced their way through the thorn hedge. They had won, but they were weary and bleeding. Slowly they began to lean back toward the farm, the side of their dead comrades, stretched upon the grass, moved some of them to tears, and for a little while they halted in sorrowful silence in the place where the windmill had once stood. Yes, it was gone. Almost the last trace of their labor was gone. Even the foundation were particularly destroyed, and in rebuilding they could not this time, as before, make use of the fallen stones. This time the stones had vanished too. The force of the explosion had flung them to a distance of 100 yards. It was a thought the windmill had never been. As they approached the farm squealer, who had unaccountably been absent during the fighting, came skipping towards them, whisking his tail and beaming with satisfaction, and the animals heard from the direction of the farm buildings the solemn booming of a gun. "What is that gun firing for?" said Boxer. "To celebrate our victory," cried Squealer. "What victory?" said Boxer. His knees were bleeding. He had lost a show and had split his hoof, and a dozen pellets had lodged themselves in his hind leg. "What victory, comrade? Have we not driven the enemy of our soil, the scared soil of Animal Farm? But they have destroyed the windmill, and we had worked on it for 2 years. What matter? We will build another windmill. We will build 6 windmills if we feel like it. You do not appreciate, comrade, the mighty thing that we have done. The enemy was in occupation of this very ground that we stand upon. And now, thanks to the little ship of Comrade Napoleon, we have won every inch of it back again. Then we have won back what we had before," said the Boxer. That is our victory," said Squealer. They limped into the yard. The pellets under the skin of Boxer's leg smarted painfully. He saw ahead of him the heavy labor of rebuilding the windmill from the foundation, and already in imagination he braced himself for the task. But for the first time it occurred to him that he was 11 years old, and that perhaps his great muscles were not quite what they had once been. But when the animals saw the green flag flying and heard the gun firing again, 7 times it was fired in all, and heard the speech that Napoleon made, congratulating them on their conduct, it did seem to them after all that they had won a great victory. The animals slain in the battle were given a solemn funeral. Boxer and Clover pulled the wagon which served as a hearse, and Napoleon himself walked at the head of the procession. 2 whole days were given over to celebrations. There were songs, speeches, and more firing of the gun, and a special gift of an apple was bestowed on every animal, which to announce of corn for each bird and 3 biscuits for each dog. It was announced that the battle would be called the Battle of the Windmill, and that Napoleon had created a new decoration, or the Order of the Green Banner, which he had conferred upon himself. In the general rejection, the unfortunate affair of the banknotes was forgotten. It was a few days later than this that the pigs came upon a case of whiskey in the cellars of the farmhouse. It had been overlooked at the time when the house was first occupied. That night there came from the farmhouse the sound of loud singing, and in which, to everyone's surprise, the strains of Beast of England were mixed up. At about 9:30, Napoleon, wearing an old bowler hat of Mr. Jones, was distinctly seen to emerge from the back door, gallop rapidly round the yard, and then disappear indoors again. But in the morning, indeed, silence hung over the farmhouse. Not a beak appeared to be stirring. It was nearly 9 o'clock when a squealer made his appearance, walking slowly and dejectedly, his eyes dull, his tail hanging limply behind him, and with every appearance of being seriously ill. He called the animals together and told them that he had a terrible piece of news to import. Comrade Napoleon was dying. A cry of lamentation went up. Straw was laid down outside the doors of the farmhouse, and the animals walked on tiptoe. With the tears in their eyes, they asked one another what they should do if their leader were taken away from them. A rumor went round that Snowball had, after all, contrived to introduce poison into Napoleon foods. At 11 o'clock, Squealer came out to make another announcement. As his last act upon earth, Comrade Napoleon had pronounced a solemn decree that drinking of alcohol was to be punished by death. By the evening, however, Napoleon appeared to be somehow better, and the following morning Squealer was able to tell them that he was well on the way to recovery. By the evening of that day, Napoleon was back at work, and on the next day it was learned that he had instructed Wimper to purchase in Wellington some booklets on brewing in and distilling. A week later, Napoleon gave orders that a small paddock beyond the orchard, which it had previously been intended to set aside as a grazing ground for animals who were past war, was to be ploughed up. It was given out that the pasture was exhausted and needed reseeding, but it soon became known that Napoleon indeed to sow it with the barley. About this time there occurred a strange incident which hardly anyone was able to understand. One night at about 12 o'clock there was a loud crash in the yard, and the animals rushed out of their stalls. It was a moonlight night. At the foot of the end wall of the big barn where the 7 Commandments were written, they lay later broken into pieces. Squealer, temporarily stunned, was sprawling beside it, and near at hand there lay a lantern, a paintbrush, and an overturned pot of white paint. The dogs immediately made a ring-round squealer and escorted him back to the farmhouse as soon as he was able to walk. None of the animals could form any idea as to what this meant, except old Benjamin, who nodded his muzzle with a knowing air and seemed to understand but would say nothing. But a few days later, Muriel, reading over the 7 Commandments to herself, noticed that there was yet another of them which the animals had remembered wrong. They had thought that the 5th commandment was no animal shall drink alcohol, but there was 2 words that they had forgotten. Actually, the commandment may read, no animal shall drink alcohol to excess. I hope you like it and it helped you to relax. So I wish you sweet dreams and